Number 10. Crime Master. Why are there so many people who have no powers of any kind on Spider-Man's enemy list? This guy just walks around with a gun. That's it! He's another one of the many crime bosses in Marvel's New York, and I guess in that respect he chose a very fitting name. He is a criminal, and he has sorta mastered it. Usually, he employs others to do his dirty work for him, although he did partner with the Green Goblin for a short while before being shot and killed. He has come back from death multiple times under multiple different identities, which kinda made it hard for fans to follow who he is, even if they cared in the first place. Number 9. Big Wheel. Hey! Wanna be a villain? Great. Just hire another guy to make you a big wheel with machine guns and rocket launchers on it so that you can ride around in it. It's that easy! That's what Jackson Wheel did. Can you guess what he called himself? When he first appeared, Big Wheel used his big wheel to chase and try to kill Rocket Racer while he was mid-fight with Spider-Man. Big Wheel wasn't even facing Spider-Man one-on-one. Just before he was about to get crushed, Spider-Man pulled Racer out of the way, and Big Wheel drove right off the side of a building and right into the Hudson River, ending both Jackson Wheel and his Big Wheel. All of this because Rocket Racer had some blackmail. Number 8. Big Man. I ain't got the facilities for that, big man. He really didn't. Frederick Foswell was a reporter at the Daily Bugle, and well, he was a little guy. Except when he wasn't. You see, Foswell was a master of disguise, and he used the costume that gave him a nice little hype boost in order for him to become aptly named Big Man. From this stature, he can now ride the adult roller coasters, reach the top shelf, and be the head of the crime gang, the Enforcers. Spider-Man works with the guy though, so unsurprisingly he was caught and incarcerated for a time. But Jonah gave him his job back afterwards, which is nice. He ended up dying in front of a bullet to save Jonah, so at least he wasn't all bad. Number 7. The Living Brain. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't a brain just kinda living by default? Like, if it's an alive human being, isn't it technically a living brain? This guy isn't living or a brain, I'm so confused! Okay, I'm gonna cut Marvel some slack here because the Living Brain is actually older than almost all of the main Marvel villains. He came before even the Green Goblin. He was created as a machine that could solve any problem, but malfunctioned after 2 guys got in a little scuffle and it went on a rampage until it was stopped by Spider-Man. It's been used by other smaller criminals, but was always stopped by Spider-Man. But hey, it eventually found steady work as a lab assistant and even saved the Spid on a few occasions. So there's that at least. Number 6. Black Fox. This one is a little sad. See, Black Fox is basically just a jewel thief who has had a very long career, seeing how he is now an old man. Just a regular jewel thief? Oh, why is this a problem for Spider-Man? It's not. It's really not. But you see, the problem for Spider-Man is that being an old man, Black Fox heavily reminds Peter of his Uncle Ben, which meant that Peter couldn't help but have a soft spot for the guy. He would let Black Fox go multiple times. I mean, I get it. I respect it. But Peter realized his weakness and stopped easing up on the old guy, finally throwing him in the slammer. While he isn't exactly threatening to anyone, he is the mentor of Black Cat, which does give him some notoriety. Number 5. Mirage. What's the best way to stop a robber? I know. Drop a chandelier on him. Wow, yeah, I guess that works. Mirage is a robber, but not just any robber. Oh, no. He and his gang had a specialty for robbing weddings. Honestly, who's expecting that? I mean, I wouldn't be. I'd be so surprised, I just give him my money, you know? He made a bad choice though, when he decided to rob the wedding of Ned Leeds and Betty Brant, where none other than Peter Parker was in attendance. Peter used his web shooters to turn off all the lights and don his spider suit. The day was saved when Spider-Man dropped the whole chandelier on Mirage, defeating him. Ouch. Number 4. The Spot. Could you imagine that the first time you reveal yourself to a hero, they just drop on the floor laughing at you? And on top of that, it's in front of Kingpin, one of the biggest crime lords in Marvel. It would be super embarrassing, except when you totally win and make them look dumb. Way to go, man. The Spot. Yes, that's his name. Had the power to create interdimensional portals, big and small, which he used to defeat Spider-Man and Black Cat the first time they encountered him. But only the first time. See, the Spot can only create as many portals as he has spots on his body, throwing them wherever he wants until he runs out, which he did in this second encounter with Spidey. And then he lost. Pretty badly. He's appeared here and there since, but he never really posed a threat to anyone, like anyone at all. But he did create the failed group, the Spider-Man Revengeance Squad, with other minor characters that lasted like 2 seconds. Hold up, I gotta stop you right there. Just wanted to let you know that I appreciate you. And I hope you appreciate us too. If you do, why not give us a little like and a follow? It really helps us to help you spend your free time watching top 10 videos. But hey, no judgment, we all do it. Number 3, slide. A chemical engineer turned super thief decked out in a super slippery suit. All right, let's get it over with. Jalome Bleacher created a chemical coating that basically eliminated the friction between an object and any surface it came into contact with, which, not even joking here, that could be really useful. Like, good job, man. Too bad the company he worked for closed their R&D department and Jalome had to find a way to independently fund his project. Honestly, I would have just found another company who wanted to fund me, but then I wouldn't appear on a list of people you never heard of, and that is a goal of mine. He created a suit with the chemical and used his slippery abilities to rob banks and try to destroy his old boss's business. His only other notable mentions were his midlife crisis and his death in a side story of the Civil War event where he was shot in the back for refusing to side with crime boss Hammerhead. I guess you could say that they had some friction. Okay, I'm just gonna slide my way to the door. Number 2, Stiltman. So long as I am the master of my stilts, I'm unbeatable. I'm completely invincible. Wilbur, just stop. Just stop, man. Despite being an adversary to both Daredevil and Spider-Man, Stiltman just couldn't seem to be taken seriously. I can't possibly imagine why. Oh wait, no, I can. It's the stilts. Yeah, it's the stilts. What's interesting is that if you go into his Marvel wiki page, Stiltman actually has quite a long history, being involved in many storylines. And his stilts are actually pretty strong. At one point, the strength of them was able to plunge She-Hulk so far into the ground, she ended up in the subway. But then she beat him in a really embarrassing way. I mean, just look. His stilts could reach up to 290 feet though, which is actually kind of cool, I think. Number 1, Hypno Hustler. Okay, just look at this dazzling man. What an icon. The Hypno Hustler made his debut in the 80s, which I hope isn't a surprise to anyone. He uses a hypnotic guitar to hypnotize people, wears headphones that stop him from hypnotizing himself, and has boots that emit knockout gas and have retractable knives. What a combo! His story involves him performing at the nightclub Beyond Forever, where Peter Parker and pals just happen to be. Him and his band use their hypnotic grooves to hypnotize the crowd into giving up their goods. Peter Parker, being the hero, obviously knows what's going on and changes into his Spidey suit. During the fight, he realizes the headphones are the only thing keeping Hypno Hustler from hypnotizing himself, and Spider-Man removes them. That's it. Fight over.
So we're all familiar with Trapster, right? Peter Petruski, the incredibly intelligent chemist who fights with pretty much a high-powered glue gun as well as other adhesives. Well, there's a mysterious woman taking on his moniker. Not much is known about this new Trapster, but she's actually the 3rd person to take on this name. Cool thing about her is that she ditched the E in Trapster because who needs the E? It's 2022. It just looks cooler. This version of Trapster first appeared rudely interrupting a fight between Spider-Man and Vulture, and she robbed the winged villain of money he had just stolen. This may have seemed like a good thing, but she didn't give the money back. She's now a member of the all-female crime syndicate, the Sinister Syndicate, having been recruited by Beetle.
Number 9, Sin Eater. Sin Eater is Stanley Carter. While his costume may have remained somewhat the same, actually pretty much the same, his appearance more recently in the comics drastically changed after he was resurrected by Kindred, who were actually revealed to be the twins. The twins being Sarah and Gabriel Stacy, who in turn were revealed to be clones created from the genetic materials of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. So, not their naturally born offspring. Yay. Then, Sin Eater died, then was resurrected again. The second time Stanley was brought back after he'd taken his own life, he appeared in a zombie-like state, making him almost unrecognizable from his usual appearance, barring the fact that his costume has remained pretty much the same since his first appearance. Although, after rising from the grave the second time, his costume is pretty tattered, so I really think some people might have been like, who dis?
So, as we stated before, there is a new channel we have out now called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, so if you're into that sort of thing, give us a follow and subscribe. We're putting out videos every day. This next master of the hunt is the ruthless son of Sergei Kravenov, simply known as Kraven the Hunter, the last son of Kraven. Sergei Kravenov, the original Kraven, wanted to carry on his legacy, so instead of having more children, because that would just take too long, plus he already has a daughter, he decided to create a whole lot of clones of himself, 87 to be exact, and attempted to train them in the ways of the hunt. Well, this current Kraven got his title by murdering all his brothers, which, hey, if you want to prove you're the apex predator, killing 87 clones of Kraven the Hunter is a great way to start your career, isn't it? He also saved the skulls and brought them before his proud dad. The son made his dad even more proud when he strangled his father to death while he was disguised as Spider-Man, thereby breaking his curse of immortality. The son has now taken on his father's moniker, Kraven the Hunter, as well as his actual name. Good job, buddy.
Number 7. Kane Parker. Kane Parker was initially a clone of Spider-Man who, yes, was considered to be, kinda evil. Chiefly because Kane didn't have any qualms with killing people, leaving them with his mark of Kane, which typically was used to kinda like burn the face of his victims. And also because he had long hair and was more moody than Spider-Man, which is a feat because Spider-Man's a pretty moody dude. In reality, the mark of Kane was actually just Kane using his spider climbing like little hooks on his hand, as we saw showcased visually in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, to burn his victims' faces. Kane was also seen as evil because he was mentally unstable, having been a defective clone who was rapidly deteriorating, which basically affected his mind. However, Kane is now known as Scarlet Spider and has a completely different look and attitude when compared to his original appearance and presentation in the comics. While still being, you know, somewhat edgy because he's still Kane, he's definitely still more of a hero now in the comics than he ever was before.
The original Super Adaptoid, created by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, was originally a villain facing off against Captain America, Iron Man, and of course the Avengers, also going up against the X-Men. It was able to mimic and visually copy anything it wanted, giving it a hero's abilities and powers. But in Amazing Spider-Man 900, however, Spidey faces off against a different version of this shape-shifting entity known as the Sinister Six Adaptoid. This version of the character sports a brand new look, most prominently featuring Doc Ock's tentacles, but there are other visual elements in the character's design as well. The Sinister Six Adaptoid is an amalgamation of sorts of, you guessed it, the Sinister Six, having the abilities of Doc Ock, Vulture, Kraven, Mysterio, Sandman, and Electro. The Sinister Six had been captured by the Living Brain, and their powers and sentience combined to form the villain. So if you thought these guys were strong on their own, imagine going up against all of them at once. Spider-Man actually needed help the real Sinister Six in order to take this abomination down. Go figure. Also, I love when villains like team up with the hero just to like, because they both hate the same person. It's just fun.
Number 5. Electro. The main Electro we've known for years is Maxwell Dillon, but there is a new Electro on the scene. This new Electro is Francine Fry. She was once the accomplice and love interest of Max, who died as a result of her love for him, and her obsession with villains and kinda her lust for them. While Max's powers were less in his control, Francine threw caution to the wind and decided to kiss him. Their kiss would result in her being electrified to death. However, she'd later be revived by Ben Reilly, operating as villain the Jackal, as part of a plot to help control Electro into basically doing his bidding. Turns out the DNA Reilly used to resurrect Francine in clone form was actually a mix of Maxwell's and her own as a result of that kiss, allowing her to harness and absorb electricity, chiefly the power of the suit that a depowered Max had at the time been given. Kissing Max once more, Francine absorbed the suit's powers, accidentally killing him in the process and becoming the new Electro. Max has since been resurrected, so now even more confusing, we have two Electros technically running around.
Up next, we're taking a look at Richard Fisk, now known as the Rose. The son of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, Richard would boast about how rich and powerful his father was, thinking he was just a highly successful businessman. Now, even if that was the case, like, come on, don't go around boasting about your parents' accomplishments. Live your own life. Well, that's exactly what Richard decided to do. Upon discovering his father was actually the kingpin of crime, Richard faked his own death and took on the moniker of the Schemer, attempting to take down his father's empire. The two would eventually reconcile after Richard felt bad about putting his dad into a coma. Fair enough. But this brings us to Richard's next moniker, the Rose. He now sported a purple mask and kept a rose in his front pocket and worked under his father, but secretly wanted to dismantle the Kingpin's organization from within. After killing a policeman in a shootout, however, Rose just realized he was a bad dude and aligned himself with his father again, but then changed his mind and wanted to take over Kingpin's organization again. Just kill your dad or don't, man. It's a decision we all have to make at some point in our lives.
Number 3. Grey Goblin. Gabriel Stacy has been known by a few different names throughout the years, and has also had his backstory somewhat altered. Initially, we knew Gabe Stacy as Grey Goblin, and later as American Son in Age of Heroes. Originally, he was introduced to us as the son of Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy, who basically had a secret love affair which resulted in the birth of 2 twin babies, Sarah and Gabriel. However, when Gabriel and Sarah were revealed to be the mysterious demonic villain returning from hell, known as Kindred, we learned that they were actually never really the natural born children of Norman and Gwen, thank goodness, but instead were clones that Harry Osborn had made, using their genetic material to get back at his father, tormenting him and making him think the 2 were really his children, when actually they weren't. It was all Harry's plot. Ha ha ha. Not only did Gabriel have a completely different look as Kindred, but he also got a completely different backstory that explained away all the weirdness of his and Sarah's original origins. Which, I mean, thank you for that, because wow, that was bad. It's not good. I don't want Norman to sleep with Gwen. I'm not here for that.
This next baseball player turned villain is known as Frederick Myers, aka Boomerang, and he's gone through several changes, having worked under criminal organizations like the Sinister Syndicate, as an assassin, going up against a number of heroes, and of course Spider-Man. So how did this boomerang wielding baddie change? Well, he ended up aiding Black Widow, Maria Hill, and the Champions in their fight against Hydra, and cut a deal to get a full pardon for all his past crimes. That's pretty sweet. He later became Peter Parker's roommate in an attempt to get closer to Spider-Man as he was attempting to find the pieces of the Lifetime tablet. Though Boomerang was lying about his true motives to Spidey, saying he was only after the tablet to keep it away from Kingpin, this was quite the opposite actually, he was working for Kingpin. Despite his deception, however, Frederick actually formed a close bond with the hero and would go on to sacrifice his own life to save him during a fight with the vampiric villain Morlun.
Number 1. Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is often known as the villain the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, if not the most iconic rogue he happens to have in his gallery. Their rivalry is an old one, going all the way back to the first appearance of the character in the 1960s, where Osborn actually first appeared not in his civilian form, but simply as the villain Green Goblin. But lately, Norman has had a change of heart, if you can believe that. It most certainly won't last forever, or at least I'd be very surprised if it did, but currently in the comics, Norman is actually one of the good guys for a change. This is after he had all of his sins purified by the villain known as Sin Eater. Initially, Peter as Spider-Man had saved Norman from Sin Eater, but after being taunted about Gwen, couldn't help but toss Green Goblin to the villain to be devoured, which, I mean, fair enough. But instead of perishing, Norman survived the encounter, no longer driven by madness, guilt, or rage. Having been purified, he was seemingly given a new lease on life, and currently remains one of the few villains purified by Sin Eater to stay that way. At least, so far.
At number 10, we have Spider-Side. First introduced as Spider-Man in the Clone Saga, Spider-Side appears as a super-jacked, massive version of Spider-Man that has Ben Reilly and Peter Parker wondering even more who the real Spider-Man is. But soon, this third Spider-Man soon goes mad and becomes Spider-Side, attacking the other heroes in a raving frenzy. He seems to be capable of some pretty nifty shape-shifting, as though he has some kind of symbiotic physiology, but ultimately he's left in the annals of the 90s and not really revisited again after the Clone Saga. My best guess is that he was just too OP and or confusing as a character. At number 9 is Mindworm. First introduced in 1974's Amazing Spider-Man number 138, Mindworm is a mutant who has the ability to absorb the psionic energy from his targets and sap their energy, and absorb that energy for himself. The first time he uses this power is on his own mother, who he accidentally kills by draining all of her energy in one go. This traumatic event drives his father into shock, causing him to run into traffic, killing him as well. Mindworm has a tough life in and out of orphanages and homeless shelters, and eventually has a run-in with Peter Parker while he's living in a neighboring apartment. But when Parker notices Mindworm's attempts at draining his psionic energy, he knocks out the villain, who is then taken to prison. Soon after this, Mindworm reforms and becomes good, but is killed by a street gang after having never actually killed anyone using his powers other than his own mother. Honestly, it's a really sad story, and I don't know why they had to do him that bad, but that's Mindworm. Pretty obscure. At number 8 is Typeface. This guy really confuses me because although his name is ridiculous and he doesn't actually have any powers at all, he still shows up a decent amount in various comics. First appearing in the year 2000, Gordon Thomas is radicalized after he returns from the Vietnam War and his wife immediately leaves him, taking their child with her. He then becomes a sign maker and goes off to be a criminal with letters drawn on his face. And he actually defeats Spider-Man during their first encounter by throwing letters at him, which doesn't make any sense to me, honestly. But what's even weirder is that he returns as a good guy during the Civil War Frontline storyline and fights alongside some pretty well-respected heroes like Battlestar and Solo before he's ultimately killed by Venom while facing off against the Secret Avengers. At number 7 is the Living Brain. This is one of the oldest Spider-Man villains in general, and especially on this list, and one that very few people ever reference these days. First introduced in 1964's The Amazing Spider-Man number 8, the Living Brain is a supercomputer that continually gets hacked by villains to attack Spider-Man and the people of New York City. Basically, this is what the height of AI looked like back in the 60s, making this villain not just obscure in the world of Spider-Man comics, but in the real world as well, as we are now in 2022. He looks like a dishwasher with arms, if we're being honest. But he sort of makes his rounds a little more than one might expect such a silly villain to. So I held him back on the list a little bit. At number 6 is the Ringer. This is one of those characters that we can basically assume was named before his powers were decided, because ultimately it's a pretty ridiculous power and suit design, especially in the early days. He basically just shoots rings at his enemies, which can do anything between entrapping the target to exploding on impact to freezing. The first time we really encounter the Ringer, he's taken out pretty quickly by not Spider-Man but Nighthawk, losing some teeth in the battle and spending a lot of time in jail. He's then eventually killed by Scourge when he's called to a bar with a group of other villains, which ends up being a trap. Later, however, it's revealed that he doesn't actually die and is revived by AIM agents who give him a cyborg body, and he's renamed Strikeback. With a big enough power boost and a totally different mantle to make him a whole different character from the Ringer is essentially lost to obscurity, making him one of the most long-lost Spider-Man villains of all time. At number 5, we have Frank Oliver, aka Kangaroo. This guy's power is basically artificially enhanced legs. And aside from that, he's just known to be a very skilled boxer who is banned from the sport after seriously injuring one of his opponents. But the way that he gets this sort of lame jumping power is when Jonas Harrow approaches him and offers him the powers in exchange for his cooperation in a highly dangerous heist. While he's infiltrating the Hudson nuclear laboratories to steal some radioactive something or other, Spider-Man swoops in to try and stop him. Well, not stop him, but to save his life, because the room he's breaking into is so radioactive that it disintegrates him immediately upon entry, and Spider-Man watches on in horror as this happens. The Kangaroo Mantle has a couple other appearances, but as far as I'm concerned, this event marks the end for the villain and leaves him behind in the void of obscurity. At number 4 is Walrus, another very strange villain based on an animal that seems to have been picked out of a hat. This New York City carpenter's journey in petty crime starts when his uncle gives him powers that marginally increase his strength, speed, and stamina. He takes on the mantle of Walrus and is first shown battling the Defenders in issue 131 in 1984. But he's taken out by a good guy version of Frogman, who at the time is understandably a less respected member of the Defenders. So it really hits home that Walrus is not to be taken seriously. And it also suggests that he was probably never meant to last very long in the first place. Years later, there is an interesting run-in with Deadpool, where Walrus gains quite a power boost and actually almost kills Deadpool, but all things considered, he is largely known to be lost to obscurity like the rest on this list. At number 3, we have Big Wheel. Originally taken on by Jackson Wheel, the mantle of Big Wheel is started when he owes money to Rocket Racer, who continues to hound him for payment. So he decides to have an enormous, extremely durable wheel crafted, which is outfitted with machine guns and can be commandeered by a driver. But his first big attack on Rocket Racer goes wrong, and Spider-Man just kind of watches it all go down. Basically, it ends in Big Wheel careening into the Hudson River. But he survives because the wheel is airtight, so he had that covered. Later, Big Wheel reforms himself and even teams up with Spider-Man at one point. Honestly, he's actually somewhere between obscure and quite prevalent depending on how you look at his legacy, because even though he seldom ever appeared in the Spider-Man comics, he has gone down as one of the most enjoyed obscure villains among Spider-Man fans. Okay, coming in at number 2 is Hypno Hustler. This guy is first introduced in 1978 and has a pretty short shelf life, like 1 issue short. Maybe with a couple more later on, but that's his main introduction. That's the only time we really see him. His powers are basically that he can hypnotize audiences at his shows using his hypnotic guitar. Playing alongside his band, the Mercy Killers, Hypno Hustler is first caught taking money and valuables from others in the audience at what appears to be their own will. But alas, it is hypnosis. He's also got these hypno boots that emit knockout gas and have retractable knives built into them as well. It's fair to say that this villain doesn't last very long and is sort of left in the dust after this first encounter with Spider-Man. Later, Hypno Hustler has a brief stint with Villainon, which is Villains Anonymous, where he tries to reform alongside the likes of Armadillo and Big Wheel himself. But that's basically it. At number 1 is Video Man. This guy's a double whammy because he is himself a rather obscure villain, all things considered. But also the technology that this character was designed in reference to is also obscure in itself, so I felt I had to put him at number 1 on the list. In fact, Video Man was abandoned so quickly by writers that his origin story is never even revealed. First appearing in the first issue of 2006's Spider-Man Family featuring Amazing Friends, he is quickly taken out after his first encounter and reduced to a little processor unit, which Spider-Man says he keeps in his freezer until, I guess, the present day, so as not to reawaken Video Man. What strikes me as strange about Video Man is that he was conceptualized in 2006, but his style is clearly referential to video games or maybe TV from the 80s or 90s, so just a total miss all around. And we're yet to see him again after his first fateful encounter in 2006.